You're listening to the AZ Wildcats podcast, brought to you by DraftKings, America's #1 sportsbook app. With John Schuster, Ben White, I'm Mike Luke. Arizona loses in a manner in which you generally don't see very often there. But I'm going to say here, and we're going to get to all your thoughts and comments here, but I will say this. Arizona has nobody to blame but themselves here. First of all, you missed way too many free throws. Every time you had an opportunity to extend the lead, you really didn't do it. Again, I mean, he'll make that shot 1 out of 100 times, but Arizona left ASU in that situation. When you're up 10 with 4 minutes left, again, Ballo's got to make that free throw right there. There was, Arizona gave them reasons, and they took advantage of it there, Shu.
I think to another degree, too, is that ASU played about as well as it could in this matchup. And I think, I don't know how many people are ultimately watching, but that is a game that sealed their position as far as a rightful berth in the NCAA tournament. The Sun Devils are an athletic team that cause Arizona and a lot of other teams. Tommy Lloyd calls them handsy. I think that's a good interpretation. They're very athletic, they're very long, and they're a problem. And yes, it looked as though with about in that 4 to 8 minute mark, it looked like Arizona was trying to about to separate, which is what we all anticipated they were going to do. But to ASU's credit, even though Arizona wasn't strong down the stretch, the Devils kept hitting threes too. And that was a thing that kept them in the game. And in the end, obviously, they hit a three that we're going to be talking about and remembering, not just for the next few days or the next few weeks, but that's probably going to be a shot that a lot of folks in this state are going to recall for decades to come.
Ben?
Yeah, I think when you look at what ASU did, not only from three, but I think you look at what they were able to do just consistently throughout the game. You know, when you talk about ASU, whether it's this year, whether it's just the entire Bobby Hurley tenure altogether, on a bad day, they can be one of the worst teams in college basketball. Right. And on a good day, if you're a 1 or 2 seed like Arizona, you want nothing to do with them. For this exact reason, if all their guys are hitting like they did tonight, I mean, you had 5 guys in double figures for ASU. I think Arizona, where they really struggled, obviously, when you look at some of the cushion room that ASU gave them late in the second half, about 6 or 7 minutes or so, where they just went on a stretch where they just ultimately couldn't hit a shot, Arizona was just never able to take advantage of that. And it's kind of like Arizona played in a way where you didn't go inside out like we've been talking about the last 3 or 4 games. That blueprint has ultimately disappeared at times, and it hurt Arizona today. I thought Tubelis, even though on paper he had 17 points, I thought he wasn't nearly as aggressive as he could have been. I thought Ballo, somebody who had a hell of a game, 4 fouls, obviously made things problems, but Arizona's game plan was not to go inside. They were just going to try to hit threes, hang with ASU, and it caught them and it burned them at the worst possible point. So that's what that comes down to.
What I don't understand when teams play Arizona, and this is twice now, and I was talking with Kyle Dodd about this earlier in the week. If I'm playing Arizona and I'm ASU or another team, some of the weaknesses that this team I've always felt has is you don't have next level ball handlers and you lack a dynamic ability on the perimeter. It's not last year's team in that you had dudes like guys who you knew were going to be NBA players. This year's team, when teams press them, when teams get up in their face, like ASU did up in Tempe when they went on that run towards here, Arizona generally doesn't respond well to that. And I don't know that. Again, I think that that's an inherent physical flaw on this team more so than anything, because again, this was not a game that Arizona should have lost when you're up the manner in which they did, but they folded down the stretch, fellas.
See, but I think that was a little bit more problematic earlier in the matchup than it was ultimately in the last 4 minutes where ASU got back into the game. I think ASU hit shots on the offensive end that allowed them to make the move. Wasn't Arizona committing turnovers? Arizona on its offensive end.
Let me just interrupt you real quick.
Free throws.
Right. Let me just interrupt you real quick. The only thing I would agree with that, but they get out of their rhythm, though. I'll give you a perfect example. That Kerr Kriisa 3 was exactly what ASU wanted right there. It was a terrible shot. There was a couple other ones like that where you're just not in the flow that you're normally in. Go ahead. Sorry about that, Shu.
That's all right. No, that's a fair point. But if you're wondering why Arizona isn't going to be, why they haven't been pressed more throughout the course of the year, there are a couple reasons, but it's going to get us to an end game conversation anyway. Coaches don't like to press, and a lot of teams don't have the bench to do it over the consistency of at least 40 minutes, let alone 20. But the point that I think Arizona is going to see at some stage in the tournament is what team is going to be willing to press them for 6 to 10 minutes. And is that strategic 6 to 10 minute full court press going to be enough to be able to be successful? Keep in mind in this matchup, though, Arizona scored 88 points. Right. 88 points is enough for Arizona to win the basketball game. It's that I think to a large degree, and you're certainly right about Kriisa being out of his rhythm on a couple of occasions. I'm not necessarily debating you in regards to why it is that the potential effectiveness of teams ultimately pressing Arizona. But the reality is that if the guy doesn't make a half-court shot, Arizona wins a basketball game. And possession before, they called a timeout, and ASU had a massive defensive lapse. Larson gets to the rack and hits a layup. Right. A layup with under a minute to play. Those shouldn't be allowed either. So it's not like Arizona was completely destitute over the course of the last 4 minutes. There were opportunities that they had. Now, they weren't good enough at the foul line. That's without a doubt. And in situations where teams press them, I think Arizona's going to have to be effective from the free throw line to be able to quell that a little bit. Because I think at some point, or a series of some points, if Arizona's lucky, the Cats are going to see pressure, and they're going to see some athletic teams that can probably play it pretty well, but they're going to play it in blocks, and they're not going to play it consistently throughout the course of the game because there's just not enough depth on a lot of these college basketball rosters. And secondly, a lot of coaches just hate the idea of consistently giving up layups. So when you're able to press, you're taking a chance in that regard. And Arizona's got big players on the inside who can get to the foul line. It's going to be up to those big players to be able to make foul shots when the opposition goes to that sort of approach.
Yeah, Ben? And the bottom line is, and we can talk about the full court, the half court shot. I'm going to call it essentially a full court shot because that's close to what it was. We can talk about, maybe some of the lack of consistency on the inside, but what this game comes down to today, and we're not having this conversation if Arizona makes their free throws.
Yeah.
They score 100 points today. Right. Point blank, bottom line, this game was lost and won at the free throw line, all self-inflicted wounds by Arizona. And I'll give ASU credit in the sense that I think in the first matchup, we saw a little bit as to, from a scouting perspective, what happens if you press somebody like Ballo and Tubelis and get them into foul trouble. And then tonight we saw kind of the same thing, and it put Arizona in an awkward position at the line, got to the free throw line 34 times, didn't seem to matter. And again, I think it all comes back to Arizona just has to have that consistency and that rhythm inside. And when they don't have that, Ballo was good in stretches, and he definitely did enough to keep Arizona in the game towards the end and help them build that lead. But ultimately, it didn't matter. I mean, your guards can only get you so far. And while we've seen a huge improvement from them, ASU is one of those teams where if they're hot, and it's going to be really hard to slow them down. Arizona didn't have any luck doing that today. And it's just one of those things where if you do what you're supposed to do and you control the things that you can control, free throws are 100% controllable. And if this team does what they need to do at the line and don't mess around today, we're having a completely different conversation. Bottom line.
Yeah, a couple things here, and I think this is an interesting point. I was just thinking this offline, and I know that a lot of people probably wouldn't do this, but we're going to get to this point here in a second, and Saul, I think, makes a great point about how they shot like that. But first, got to pay the bills, the 4 peaks. You only saw 3 of the peaks today. Maybe if you had seen the 4th, or actually, I don't know, maybe Jordan Maines counts as a 4th peak, whatever you want to say. But 4 Peaks, the official brew of PHNX Sports. You can check it out at the Tempe location, hang out with the cool kids like the Shane Diefenbachs of the world, or come to the Tap and Bottle watch parties and get 4 Peaks, get some kilt lifter. Very good stuff. Check out the show notes and the link in the description. But again, 4 Peaks, the official brew of PHNX Sports and the DraftKings Sportsbook app. Code word PHNX. Here's the deal. You can put down $5, a measly $5, and you can get up to $200 in free plays on NBA games. NBA games are back left and right now. They are proliferating the entire TV screen. The Phoenix Suns now have the best player in the Valley since Charles Barkley exited before Ben was even born. And again, you might say, what's that?
That's not
true. What year
true.
were you born, Ben?
96.
You might have been one at that. When did Barkley leave? 96 or 97?
I think it was 97. So I get 1 year.
All right, either way.
And you remember it well. That's the most important thing. You have a very in-depth personal memory of Barkley in the Valley.
All right, well, either way, DraftKings Sportsbook app, that's where you want to check it out. 21 and up, Arizona only. Gambling problem, call 1-800-NEXT-STEP. Again, check out the show notes and the link in the description. But good time to bet on the Suns. Maybe don't bet on the Suns, being that we turn every single team we tell you to bet into a bad team, or we turn the Pistons into a championship contender.
Hopefully, by the way, I talked to somebody today who thought about betting the Arizona money line as part of a much more complicated bet, specifically because he listened to what was said on the PHNX broadcast, and then specifically because he listened to what was said on the PHNX broadcast, went the other direction, and ultimately that proved. I
was going to prove, yeah. You know what? I never said that I was an expert. I'll give my opinion. I never said that I was smart, though. Okay, so and there were some really good things. It's too bad to take away from this game. First of all, Cedric Henderson had a fantastic game. Pelle Larsson had a really, really good game. The Swedish pinball, our guy said, both were really, really good. I got a question, though. Ben and I were texting this back and forth a little bit. I know the numbers that Tubelis put up, but at least to me, it feels like there's something a little off there right now. I don't know if whether it's from an engagement perspective, or I'll give you a perfect example. And again, I know he was surprised. He grabs that rebound and falls down and then just lets the dude take it from him. Like, I don't know. It just feels different to me right now. I know he put up 17 and 9, but it didn't feel like the same kind of 17 and 9 that we've watched earlier in the season.
Man, I'm not sure anybody has an answer. I was hopeful, and 17 and 9 is a much better number than we had seen in the last 3 weeks. The argument has been that Tubelis has gotten into foul trouble and hasn't been on the floor, and therefore, can't be as effective as he was because he was saddled with the foul difficulty. Today, that wasn't nearly as much the case, but it's going to be one of those things where Agatha Christie hasn't cracked this one yet. So I don't know if there's something more going on. But if there is something more going on and it doesn't get rectified, Arizona's in trouble because they need to. Tubelis makes the most notable difference on this team. He provides, along with the complement that is Ballo, they provide a difference that very few teams in the country have. And being different and being able to play that difference is a big deal in the NCAA tournament. Yeah, you want to be well-rounded. Yeah, you want to play tight defense. You want to be able to rebound. You want to shoot the ball really well. But we're not the first people to say it, and we're not going to be the last people to say it, that matchups are important in events like the NCAA tournament. And Arizona is a matchup problem a lot, but it's a matchup problem when Tubelis and Ballo are on the floor at the same time and both playing well. And if there's something more going on with Tubelis at this stage, and it doesn't get rectified in a way where he gets his confidence back and becomes the difference maker and the inside track winner for Conference Player of the Year, then, Arizona could have some very real difficulties next week into the Pac-X tournament and certainly in their run, whatever it happens to be in the NCAA field.
Yeah, he's huge. I mean, he's the centerpiece of this team, and I think there's a couple of areas that we can dive into when it comes to this question and this concern. I think the first thing is I don't know if there's maybe a lingering injury behind the scenes. I don't know if it's a mental issue just with some of the foul trouble, but to Shu's point, can't really make that argument today. 3 fouls, most of them came later in the game. And what was most concerning to me is when you watch him play today, I think especially early on, the first 5-10 minutes were most telling because it seemed like Arizona just really wasn't getting the ball to him. He wasn't being really aggressive. He wasn't asking for the ball. And if there was really any guy in this game who was going to put the ball on the floor and dribble and get to the rim, ironically enough, I mean, obviously it was Ballo, but that guy outside of Tubelis today was Larson. So I don't know if it's a matchup thing. I mean, I think you look at what we've seen across the board, right, in the Pac-12, where, you know, you go up against bigs like Dante at Oregon, but then you also go up against smaller teams in the conference where they don't really even have much of a guy who can, let alone hang or even match up with him, just because of how, you know, tall and versatile he is and the skill set he brings to the table. So when you go up against those bigger athletic guys, how is he going to respond? And we had that conversation. It was lingering for quite a while throughout the season, but then you get to games like UCLA, you get to the Oregon game where they just absolutely dominated them the second time around. So definitely a huge question, because if Tubelis is not giving you 20 and 10, 15 and 10 in a meaningful, impactful way every single game, this team's got some problems, and they've got to figure that out, because they play inside out, and they certainly haven't played that the last few weeks.
Sorry, Jacob. I agree. The Jacob Franklin, the ASU aficionado that he is. Jacob, do you want to hop in here real quick? Come on, Jacob. Hop in here real quick. It's better to be seen, not heard. Hop in, Jacob. I'm bringing you in. I'm just kidding with you. I won't bring it in. But all right, sorry. I'm playing comments that he said that he already put up there. That's on me. Jacob, why don't we go to the stat of the game, or whatever it's called. Let's do it by the numbers. Yeah, I mean, you know, like I said, if ASU has 23 assists and 11 turnovers, and Arizona has 16 assists and 13 turnovers, and misses 11 free throws, that's a recipe for disaster right there. Good job there, Jacob. What do you guys think? What do you guys make of those numbers, Shu?
Well, I think one of the things, and really the defense, I think, is largely a concern here. Arizona plays a style of defense that basically expects teams to regress to their mean. And how that works is that if a team gets hot from three-point range, that's okay. Arizona doesn't believe it's just going to happen throughout the course of the game. Eventually, they're going to miss, and Arizona's going to do its job on the glass, and their offense is going to work effectively enough, and the style will be, to the point where Arizona can ultimately be successful and pull away. Looked like that approach was going to work again today. But ASU, again, to its credit, in the last 4 minutes, hit some big shots and got back into it. And shooting 40% from three-point range is a significant number from them, and they obviously moved the ball at 23 assists as well. On the offensive end, and you and Ben rightfully alluded to this, the Cats have to be better from the foul line. And they're a team that can shoot well from from the free throw line. And today they just weren't able to get it done as consistently as they need to be. Example of this, when Ballo got injured on the dunk attempt and tweaked the knee a little bit and couldn't play that possession, ASU was kind of screwed in terms of the options that they had, because they had Arizona had four other guys on the floor who could hit free throws, and Henderson was successful in getting that done. But the Cats across the board weren't as good throughout the course of the game in that regard. It ultimately caught up to them. Again, Arizona scored 88 points in this game. You get to that number, you're going to win a bunch of basketball games, and Arizona's won a bunch of basketball games scoring 80 or more. So offensively, even with Tubelis struggling a little bit and the Cats kind of trying to figure some things out and maybe being out of rhythm and so forth, if they shoot to a level from the foul line that they're expected to be, they're a team that scores in the 90s and they win the basketball game. So right now, generally speaking, I think the offense is working reasonably well. My concern, and it ranks a little bit higher in pecking order than how well do they handle the press, is how well does their defense hold up if a team gets hot from three-point range. And this tends to be, today was kind of an example, but I think there are other teams out there that play into this. The Cats are not a team that score in transition based on what they do from a steal or a block shot standpoint. The times when they run are generally off rebounds. So they play basically a half-court style of defense.
Right.
And which is okay. It's how they're built. But one of the ways that they try to make that work is by hoping's the wrong word, but believing that teams are eventually not going to be able to continue to drain three-pointers and that they're not going to give up offensive rebounds to give teams second shot opportunities. The reason they lost at Stanford had a lot to do with Stanford having second shot opportunities. The reason they lost today is that ASU hit a bunch of threes. Those are two areas that usually work just fine for Arizona to get them W's. But today wasn't the case. And those are the kinds of matchups that concern me in the NCAA tournament. A team that rebounds offensively well, or a team that can just drain it from three. And if those two matchups occur, I think Arizona's going to be in for a struggle as it tries to advance.
Yeah, and the concerning thing too is, especially after you get after that first round, a lot of teams are in that category. A lot of teams in the round of 16, in the round of 8, in the round of 4, etc. They do those things very, very well. So it's concerning if you're Arizona. And I just think from a defensive thing, I think this team has shown the ability, from a front court standpoint, obviously, but from a guard standpoint, to lock down when they really need to. But today, it just seemed like they were lazy. I mean, ASU, not only were they making threes, but one thing I think people don't really realize, and, I think you saw it later in the game with some of these floaters and some of these other points that especially Horn was getting, they made a lot of easy shots in the paint, in jump shots, in and around the rim. And that just typically doesn't happen with Arizona teams. I think they got lazy. I think they tried to beat ASU at their own game. And at that point, it didn't matter. So I think if you're Arizona, the lingering thing and the big question you take away from this game is the defense, on the outside. And then offensively, 88 points is great, but how do we control things better at the free throw line? How do we not, miss, 42% of our shots especially when we're getting to the line 34 times. ASU, right, if essentially gave Arizona this game at the free throw line, if Arizona shoots free throws the way they have, most of the regular season. So, and I think the last thing too is this game, the loss, the situation, there's a lot to take away and there's a lot to break down and a lot of different ways you could spin it. But if this loss occurs in November or December, we're not really fired up and having this conversation. It's just at the worst time because you've got the LA schools next week. You're concerned about NCAA tournament implications. And now that you had that 1 seed probably locked down. And now you're probably looking at a 2 or 3 seed, probably looking at the East. It's just a really bad time for this to happen to Arizona.
Yes, we're going to get to what Janet L makes an interesting point. Janet L, if you don't like me, then this is the person that you need to direct all of your ire towards because she gave birth to me. So again, there's nobody that you could blame more for Mike Luke than this. But Janet L says, Zoo free throws and a lack of defense were keys. Also, non-call near end on defensive end was big, resulted in the ASU basket. See, I disagree with Mom here. One simple fix, though, get Zoo's mom back was his best weekend. I agree with that part. But to me, that when Zoo got that rebound, he just gave the ball away right there. He was on the ground and he gave the ball away and ASU made a 3. To me, outside of the Cambridge shot, that was the biggest turning point of the game right there. That's something where you got to be tougher with. And he just kind of looked, all right.
Well, I think he was anticipating one of two things were going to happen. After he got knocked off of his feet, then you're going to hold on to the ball. The other guy's you're either going to get a call for a foul or you're going to hold on to the ball. The guy's going to reach in and then it's going to be a jump ball. And to ASU's credit, and I said, hey, there's basketball here. I'll take that. Kicked it out and the guy hit a 3. So yes, I agree. It was one of those weird in the moment moments that didn't work well for Tubelis, but hopefully it's a learning experience type of thing where you have to just not anticipate you got to be tougher until the ref blows the whistle. And that wasn't the case. And it was obviously a play that, it's obviously a play that hurt Arizona and got ASU back into the game. There was also something earlier that Saul mentioned in the comments about ASU playing its best game of the year. Right. And just shooting, and they did. Yeah. And again, if this game goes to overtime, ASU is going to lose. They had 2 players who had fouled out. They had to win this game in regulation, and even then, they had to make a ridiculous shot that's going to be remembered for decades. Right. Certainly up in Tempe to win the basketball game. The frustration is understandable that ASU made it closer, but ASU played, to their credit, they played a great game today. And they are the type of team that can be a matchup problem. And, for 3 of the 4 halves that these two teams have faced each other, ASU's been a matchup difficulty for Arizona. So the concern moving ahead from a Wildcat perspective is how are they going to deal with some of the other teams out there that maybe are built in a way that ASU is, and what are they going to need to do to be able to work their way through when those matchups occur?
All right. Now, I don't want to be turned into the sky is falling thing, because right now a lot of people are, some ASU fans are in here right now. Keep in mind, ASU fan, we're going to be nice to you right here, because again, it was a good win for you, but you're still the entity that doesn't matter in football or basketball, period. I'm happy you got this win, but at the end of the day, ASU doesn't matter in either one. You need to remember that. You can have wrestling, you can have golf, whatever it is, but you don't really matter in any of the sports. I know this is a good win for you. Now, what does matter, though, is tap and bottle. Tap and bottle downtown. Now, you might say to yourself, Mike, what's going on in Tap and Bottle downtown? A watch party next week, next Saturday. We would love to see you down there. And again, we got Arizona UCLA to finish out the season. We're going to be a testy game right there. Come down there, have some Four Peaks, and watch the game. Love to see you down there. Check out, again, the show notes in the link in the description, and Illegal Pete's. Ben White is born in 1996. Now, Ben might be getting a little bit old for Illegal Pete's. Some would say you never get too old for Illegal Pete's. It's always a good spot to be. The great Jacob Franklin could go down there. People would be looking up at him. Or I could go down there. People would be looking down at me. But it doesn't really matter, though. Either way, it's a good time, good food, good drink. And again, nobody goes to Illegal Pete's and said that was a boring time. So again, for either one, check out the show notes and the link in the description. All right, as far as seating goes, I think this probably... Because, and this is where it's hard, because when you're in the Pac-12, everybody reacts in a big way because they say, oh, the Pac-12 is a terrible conference. What does this really mean for Arizona? The one thing I will say, though, about this is that, the Pac-12 has a bad national reputation, whereas opposed the Big Ten is viewed as basically the NBA training ground right there. And so, again, a loss in the Big Ten, people say, well, they're just going to cannibalize each other. A loss in the Pac-12 is, oh, yuck. So Arizona is dealing with someone signing autographs. That is very funny. But Arizona's also got to deal with a little bit of that stigma. I think that it probably puts them down to probably a 3 seed right now, guys. What do you think?
Man, I don't know. I think Arizona's still more than likely going to be on the 2 line, but if they drop 1 or 2 in Los Angeles, which is certainly plausible, and I think if they drop 2 in LA, they're probably, I can certainly see them as a 3 seed. The larger problem, more so than 2 or 3, is that by virtue of losing to ASU today, I find it difficult to argue that Arizona is going to be situated in the West. And that's unfortunate, because the way that things set up, Arizona's fan base was going to be potentially available there. But now that UCLA is all but, sealed winning the conference, even if Arizona wins in Los Angeles, it becomes, I think, and maybe you could argue has a better resume. It becomes a very difficult argument to make, I think, to keep Arizona, to not keep UCLA in the West by virtue of winning the conference. And that means,
especially if they win it by 2 or 3 games.
Right. Yeah. And that means you got to ship Arizona somewhere. And, that's the aspect that I think is unfortunate here. And, that's the area where, it might be a tougher road for the Cats because they just aren't going to attract as many fans. I mean, the Cats travel, the Cats draw, and a lot of folks are going to go watch Arizona regardless of how long they're in this tournament and where they play. But this is the loss that I think makes it significantly more difficult to make a feasible argument that Arizona is a team that stays out West. UCLA has been more consistent in conference play, and they're going to earn.
Does that change? Let me ask you this, though. Does that change if Arizona goes in and sweeps the LA schools, beats UCLA, you'd be 2-0 against UCLA, and you would have a lot better wins than UCLA would at that point. Does that change your opinion?
I still think you can make the argument better, but I still think that becomes a slightly more difficult argument to make. There's a path, but I think that path is closing, Because the argument I think the committee could make here is that, yeah, you won at UCLA, but UCLA had already clinched the conference. And so they're still going to win the league. Now, what I thought was probably going to happen is that in the Pac-X tournament, if Arizona and UCLA, the team that went further in that conference tournament was going to get preferential treatment in terms of which one was going to be seeded west. So you could make the suggestion that Arizona wins at USC, that's a good win. Wins at UCLA, excellent win, and then goes further in the Pac-X tournament than UCLA does. Even though UCLA wins the conference, you can at least under that scenario make the argument that Arizona is seated slightly more favorably and perhaps remains in the West. But I think as a result of what happened today, it becomes a lot more difficult to make that argument. And I think it's more than likely that Arizona is going to be a 2 or a 3 in some other region.
The legend, the GM that runs PHNX, the best free throw shooter in Arizona high school history, Saul Bookman. This will always be your intro, is on here. Hello, Saul.
How's it going, guys?
All right, what are your thoughts there, big dog?
I mean, I'm not going to panic. They shot decently today. Their season average for the most part. They got sloppy at the end, and when you get sloppy, you leave things up like this up to chance. And yeah, it was a fluke shot, but it should have never gotten that close. And I don't think it's not time to hit the panic button. I have full faith that they'll probably sweep the LA schools because that's just like how Arizona responds. So I think it was a bigger win for ASU than it was a loss for U of A. But you know, it is what it is at this point.
Well, you got to remember too that Arizona has played, and this is good and bad, has played its best games against the best teams that they've played, and also has played some of its worst games against the worst teams that it's played. And you know, you're going to have a fully motivated team. I will say this: if they go to LA though and they lay an egg, then there's some questions. I get you're playing on the road, but at the same time, I would have some questions then about that, because you should be fully motivated after this game.
There's just something about this Arizona team right now. I mean, and all season long, you know, they have these lulls that definitely concern you. The lack of a really, like this year, I know Courtney Ramey's been very good, but for the most part, it's been kind of an inconsistent perimeter threat. Obviously, they've relied heavily on the post play, but in a game like this, when another team is matching you shot for shot, that's when you kind of notice it a lot more, especially when they weren't really attacking down low as much as they have in the past. Now, I've watched ASU quite a bit, being up here in the PHNX studios and Shane and company watching these games. I've watched them all year long, and they are a far more athletic team than people give them credit for, and they're a very solid defensive team. And the thing that's always been, you know, against them was if they could ever hit a shot, because that team is one of the worst shooting teams in the country, period. And end of discussion. So the fact that they started off the game hitting like their first 4 threes, I was like, oh shit, it's going to be one of those games. Like, and you got to know that. You got to know that if you're U of A, like, okay, well, they clearly they took the good juice today and they're ready to go. But I thought they were falling apart. So this is a fluke victory. I don't care what anybody says. Like, Arizona had full control. They should have put it away. ASU was playing out of their minds from the perimeter. They typically do not shoot like that. They got guys that shoot 20% from 3 on the year that were hitting threes left and right. Like, bro, I'm not going to stress about this one.
Right. And at the end of the day, Arizona's 22-5. You're probably going to drop from 7 to 10 in the national rankings. So, I mean, people do need to keep that in perspective right here. And everybody's losing games too. So, you know, now let me ask you this. What do you think this does for ASU's NCAA tournament chances?
ASU has to win one of the 2 in LA. If they don't win one of the 2, let's just say they get swept in LA, they got to keep it extremely close in both of those games. Like, I mean, almost buzzer beater like for both those games. And then on top of that, they cannot get bounced in the first round of the Pac-12 tournament. That's like their calling card. That's what ASU is known for, is getting bounced by loser teams in the first round of the Pac-12 tournament and going home before U of A even has to play their first game. That's what ASU does. they got to change that narrative
Right.
This time around. Again, like I think that I thought if they were going to win one of the 3 games, it wouldn't have been against us. I thought for sure it would have been against UCLA because I feel like they match up pretty well with UCLA, and they kind of faltered the first time around. Again, I think U of A will end up getting a 2 or a 3 seed. If it's a 3, that's probably more beneficial because they might keep them out west if they're a 3. If they're a 2, they're definitely going somewhere else. There's no way they're going to be a 2 out west. There's just not a chance.
Right.
I think U of A has to win the Pac-12 tournament, in my opinion, to stay out west.
Well, because the thing is, then if you beat the LA schools, then you've got the Pac-12 tournament coming up as well. You're going to have opportunities. You could conceivably play UCLA 2 more times right here, and
Exactly.
and if you get those wins, and if you could get those wins, again, you look at it. You got UCLA. You would have UCLA 2 or 3 times. You'd have Creighton. You'd have Tennessee. You'd have Indiana. You'd have San Diego State. Those are all top 25 wins that you can't really take away. What are you saying up there, John Schuster?
Yeah, I get the argument. I think it's plausible. UCLA basically wrapping up the conference a week before the conference concludes makes that a tough argument to me.
What about if they play in the NCAA?
I just think UCLA has the inside track here to get preferential treatment in terms of being the team that is seated in the West. And to me, that's a little bit more or significantly more important, to be honest with you, than whether Arizona's a 2 or a 3. I'd just rather Arizona be in the West. I think it gives them an opportunity based on the fans that show up to be here. Is it plausible? Is it a solid argument? Yeah. But my guess here is that UCLA, by virtue of Arizona losing today, assuming that UCLA wins tonight, wins over the weekend, assuming UCLA wraps it up before Arizona and UCLA face off, it seems to me that UCLA is going to be the team that gets the nod, is probably going to be the team that stays out west. And, Arizona's going to have to go through a bracket somewhere else.
If Arizona beats UCLA all 3 times that they face them this year, which I feel confident in saying that they're probably going to match up with them in the Pac-12 tournament at some point, then I would disagree. I would say that they would get the nod over UCLA because they just beat them 3 times in their last 3 matchups, and especially with 2 coming in the last 2 weeks of the season. So I would probably give the nod to Arizona at that point. I feel like they would have avenged their awful loss today, and so I would feel confident in saying that. So I that's the only part I would disagree with you. If UCLA wins one of those 2 matchups remaining, then yeah, UCLA is definitely going to get the nod.
Breaking news, Joe Lunardi now has Arizona as the 3rd 3 seed right now. So that would mean that he essentially has them as the 11th team in the country right there. Got some room that you can make up there a little bit. But now, let me tell you this. Saul, have we told you about Mountain Mike's Pizza?
Yeah, that is delicious.
All right. Now, many people think I'm Mountain Mike. They're wrong. I am not Mountain Mike. I am just Mike. Now, Oracle and Wetmore, though, that's where you go and you get the Mountain Mike's Pizza. You can get the pepperonis. You can get the pizza. We have had John Schuster come on the show with Mountain Mike's paraphernalia in hand. Brad Alice has done as well. Ben White told us about the one in California. It is all over the place. It's taken over, and it's a great place to go watch games, get some drink, maybe some Four Peaks there as well, some kilt lifter, but Mountain Mike's Pizza, good stuff. Now, we got a Phoenix diehard read, but since we got the GM, we got the GOAT on here, I figured that I might cede the floor to you for this read here, Saul.
I mean, what's there left to talk about? I mean, becoming a diehard is the best way to go. So we have a bunch of stuff going on. We have these golf tournaments that we call tea parties that are just one-night events that you guys get to come out and hang out with. And I know that peeps in Tucson are probably like, hey, but, it's kind of hard to drive up. I get it. We're working on that stuff. But in the meantime, if you become a diehard, you get discounts on merch, you get discounts, member exclusive access to some of the articles that are written. And then you get cool little inside tips. Like, for instance, we have lower bowl tickets for the Suns versus the Nuggets, the number 1 seed in the West versus Kevin Durant and the new look Suns here in about a month. And guess who gets first dibs on those tickets? Diehards in our Discord. So become a member. There's so many different perks that I haven't even mentioned, but it's $80 for a year, and it's definitely well worth the money. I promise you that.
That was read like a GM right there. Good job there, Saul. All right, now let's wrap this up. Here are my thoughts here, and then we'll just go around the table right here. At the end of the day, Arizona is not as good. This year's team is not as good as last year's team. And you know what? There's nothing wrong with that. You lose Ben Mathurin, you lose Koloko, you lose Dalen Terry. I've thought from day one, this is an amazing job by Tommy Lloyd, because I felt this team was more like a 17-20 team going into the year. But they're playing above that right there, but they do have flaws for sure. I mean, again, you don't have great ball handling. It's not next level perimeter athleticism. And you know what? If you're going to win games, you're going to have Azuolas Tubelis be that All-American guy that he's been. If he's not that dude, then you can lose. I've said it from day one. This team could lose in the second round, or they could make it to the third weekend, and anything in between would not surprise me. Shu, Ben, and then we'll let Saul with the home run off the end.
The issues that I rank as Arizona's concerns: defense, especially if a team gets hot on the perimeter. Defensive rebounding. If a team across from them has a good offensive rebounding performance and gets second looks per possession, that's going to be a problem for an Arizona defense that I think has a tendency to play pretty well against inconsistent offenses, but against athletic teams that know how to run good stuff. I think that can be an issue that works against them. And obviously beyond that, free throw shooting. My fear here. Oh, okay. Hey, I've been thinking this for a while. Arizona's going to lose in the second round or make it to the Final Four. My fear here is that what we're reliving is 1990 again, where Arizona was a 2 seed, won in the first round, and got throttled by Alabama, which was a 7 seed in game 2. Yeah. And so my concern is that this team looks a little bit like that. They are reliant on power on the inside. They weren't the most athletic team on the perimeter, and an athletic team like Alabama blew their doors off. But I like how they, for the most part, how they run their offensive stuff. I think they've shown some versatility. They've scored points while Tubelis has been struggling. Again, they put up 88 points today and did not shoot well from the foul line. So there are reasons to believe that Arizona is still a problem come tournament time, despite the setback that took place today against an ASU team that belongs in the field. Is going to be a pain in the ass if they're in the field, and hopefully, can make the Pac X fairly interesting and get a little bit more representation once the selection committee ultimately makes its decisions.
Ben?
Yeah, I think Arizona is one of those teams, right, where I think Jerry Palm even put this out there a little bit this morning, talking about this is a team that could easily lose in the first round, or this is a team that could win the national title. So I think a couple of things. I think defense, like we hit on, right, I think defensively from a guard standpoint, you've just got to stay in front of your guys. I mean, ASU is just getting anything they wanted today, and Arizona's shown times throughout the year where they can lock in defensively when they need to. And then, to me, the big question, too, with the front court is, how do we get that consistency and that impactful play from Tubelis going again? I think he's somebody who, had 17 tonight. He was a guy who disappeared in stretches. He wasn't being as aggressive. I thought, I don't think they even went to him until 8 minutes into the game, where Kriisa had that kind of under the look pass to get him to the basket. So you've got to get your offense flowing inside out. I think defensively you have to be better. And I think more importantly, it comes down to what you have next week against LA. You've got to sweep the LA schools. You've got to still have that good seed in the Pac-12 tournament, and you've got to take care of business. And if you do that, if you beat UCLA, I kind of differ from Shu, and I think I kind of meet Saul in the middle, in the sense that I think this team still finds a way to, maybe have a 3 seed out west. They just have to take care of business and be consistent and make free throws.
All right. Speaking of free throws, Saul Bookman.
Christ. It's like Ben did that on purpose because he knew exactly what Mike was going to say. Jesus. Yeah, make free throws. Obviously, that's clear. But one thing I will say is this: the high-low option from the two bigs is, a lot of teams just don't have that around the country, and they don't have the skill sets to be able to execute that at such a high level like Arizona. So there are going to be teams, and I do feel like this tournament specifically is going to be extremely matchup based. So you know what that means? It probably means we're going to fuck around and find ourselves playing Xavier in the second round, and that mentality matched up almost similar to what you saw today with ASU. And could it be a problem? Who knows? I like Arizona's chances. I think it's definitely going to be matchup dependent. I don't, but the thing is every top 10 team in the country right now is literally going through the same exact thing, where there's no dominant team this year, and any one of the top 16 teams in the country right now could finish being eliminated in the first round or win the national championship. It's such a crapshoot this year, which is why there's probably a little bit more emphasis on trying to capitalize on the success that you had earlier and seeing if you can recoup that here in the postseason. So I like Arizona's chances. Defensively, they got to step it up big time. I think that's going to be their calling card. They got to play as physical as ASU was today, and we'll see where it goes from there.
All right. For John Schuster, Ben White, Saul Bookman, the great Jacob Franklin, who will not come on the scene. He just wants to give little forks up things behind the scene. We will get him on at some point. And yes, Shane Diefenbach, I am aware of the game. I saw who won. And everybody out there, great comments. Appreciate you all. We're here during victory. We're here during losses. If you're going to back the A when we win, you got to back the A when you lose. All right. For everybody out there, I'll be back with you tomorrow. No days off on these parts. You've been listening to the AZ Wildcats postgame.